I'm Jeri Beel, Director of Grants Development at Lakeland College. And I just wanted to have you get sort of a feel for where I come from. And so we have a map. Lakeland College is in East Central Illinois, and we serve all or part of 15 counties and 32 school districts. And our district covers about 4,000 square miles. So we are primarily rural. We have a large area to cover, a lot of small nonprofits in our area that we have the potential to work with. We have 20,000 students enrolled annually in courses for credits, and that could be just one course that someone has taken, but we do have drastically increased our enrollment, and that 20,000 is last year's figure. We also have 12,000 full-time equivalent students enrolled annually, and those would be students who are taking a full load of courses. This does include Department of Corrections centers. We serve 10 Department of Corrections centers across the state, providing education to inmates there. We have 363 full-time and 798 part-time employees, and our primary regional industries are manufacturing, healthcare, retail trade, and agriculture. I included this map intentionally to show you where I come from, but also to let you know that this is something that you might want to be thinking about including in your grant proposals if you don't already. As you're applying for federal funds, most of the readers are not going to know where you're from. They may not know what your town, where your town is located, and it's good for them to see kind of a snapshot of where you are. When I started with Lakeland College, it was 2001. And we had received one major federal grant through the Department of Education, and that was being implemented when I came to the college. But primarily, we had very little grant funding the year that I started, except for that particular grant. So I wanted to show you a picture of where we were and where we've come to. And when I say I started, this just kind of dovetails with my history of the college. I'm not taking credit for everything that we've done by any means. There's been a ton of people who have been responsible for this success. And although I come kind of proud of this record, you know, I'm hearing from other organizations that are getting significantly more federal dollars. But I think as a more rural community college, it's important that you see that, you know, there is the potential to go from very little grant funding from the federal government to quite significant. And Lakeland does get more federal money than this, but this represents competitive federal grants that are written new every year to the federal government. So in fiscal year 2002, and our fiscal year runs July 1 to June 30th, we had, if you look at the blue bars, about $26,000 in funding from private and local sources, $143,000 from the state, and less than $50,000 from the federal government. This past fiscal year, 2010, we had again increased the foundation and private funding to $94,000. The state was at $566,000, with some of that coming from the federal government passed through the state. And then our federal funding increased to over $5 million, which was a record for the college. And all of that funding from 2002 to 2010 included a number of different agencies. And those were the National Science Foundation, the United States Department of Agriculture, Department of Education, Department of Energy, Department of Health and Human Services, and the Department of Labor. So we have a pretty wide representation of the federal agencies that we have received funding for. Going back to kind of the map that was in the beginning of the presentation, I thought about, you know, what's really been our roadmap for success? How did we get from 2002 to 2010? And there's an enormous amount of information and work that took place to get us there. But just a few of the tips that I can provide you with. The first would be to start small. If you haven't been receiving federal funding yet, don't expect to get that $5 million award in your first grant application. And look for programs that have fairly narrow eligibility. For us as a community college, there are many programs that we can apply to, and I'm going to use the National Science Foundation as an example. They do fund community colleges. However, they also fund universities to a much larger degree. So when we look at the National Science Foundation, we want to look for those programs that are sort of community college friendly and aren't real research based. So start small and identify an organization that fits your a grant that fits your organization pretty well. The first example, and this is going back to 2002 when we sort of started building this federal success, we identified a program with the United States Department of Agriculture called the Secondary and Two-Year Post-Secondary Educational Challenge Program. The money wasn't large, it wasn't huge. The limit was $40,000. We received a grant of $39,900. But that grant was only for public secondary schools and public or private nonprofit junior and community colleges. So that screamed Lakeland College. And it was the first year of this grant. So we thought, okay, we can get in on a brand new program. You know, we're exactly the type of organization they're seeking to fund. And how do we do that? The challenge that we had at the time, we had an ag business program that we needed to make easier for our high school students to get into. And then we needed to make it easier for those students who wanted to go on to transfer to a university. So we looked at who can we get for our high school partners. And we partnered with Eastern Illinois Education for Employment System, and they were a consortium of school districts in our region. So again, we worked with Our Place, which is our 4,000 square mile district. And then we also worked with Southern Illinois University and a statewide organization called Facilitating Coordination Agriculture Education, or FK. And we brought those people to the table. We talked about what we needed to do, and we put them into the grant as partners. In fact, they received some funding, so we were able to go for a $40,000 grant as opposed to a $25,000 grant, which is all that we could have requested if we just did this on our own. And then in 2008, just a couple of years ago, we again looked for a smaller federal opportunity through the Department of Health and Human Services, which was a Rural Health Network Development Planning Grant with a limit of $85,000 in funding. Although this eligibility extended to any public or non-private entity, the caveat for us was that it had to be in a rural area. Again, that was Lakeland College. So we thought we had a fairly good shot just based on the eligibility. We again brought in partners, and we looked at 2 regional hospitals, a healthcare clinic, and our local workforce investment board. So we brought those together in a partnership. The purpose of this grant was really to start forming a network in our region to connect the healthcare organizations with the agencies or the organizations that can provide the training and the jobs that are needed, and then the people who have the access to the folks who need the training. So that partnership worked quite well. And the beauty of this was that the grantees from this original $85,000 grant are eligible to apply for additional funding for implementation, and we're doing that right now for a grant that would be in the neighborhood of $200,000 to $300,000. Another tip was just to determine who else is doing what you're doing or could do what you're doing, who has the resources that you need, or who serves the same target population that you're proposing to serve. And this is really about trying to find out what's going on, doing an assessment of your area, your place, to figure out how you can fit in with what everyone else is doing, or bring in people to your project so that you can all benefit each other and position yourselves better for this grant funding. As you're looking for those partners that you want to bring into your project, you really need to involve them early on. And I think if any of you have written grants or been doing this for very long, you've probably gotten that last-minute phone call from somebody who says, I'm writing a grant to the Department of Labor and I really need a community college partner, or I really need a social service partner. So can you write me a letter of support? And I've gotten those calls, and in the beginning I really tried hard to help folks. And then when some of those grants came through, I realized that if you don't involve your partners in the planning process early enough that they can have some input, it's not a true partnership. You've gotten a letter of support and someone who's not going to be there for you when you need their help. So make sure that you bring them in early, and actually, if you can get in writing the roles of the partners and the responsibilities. I found that it works really well to send out a bulleted list to a partner and say, here are the things that we really need you to do for us. Are you willing to do these? Or which ones are you willing to do? But let them know what it is that you need. This is an example that has really led to some great success for us. In 2006, the Department of Labor had a community-based job training grant program, and this was an initiative of the Bush administration. And so we submitted a proposal the first year and received $863,000. This required specific partnerships. We had to have a partnership with education. We had to have a partnership with our workforce investment board. So we pulled a number of different partners together, and the problem that we had was Lakeland College had a waiting list of people to get into our nursing programs. We had hospitals and healthcare organizations who, like the rest of the state and the country, had a shortage of nurses. So we got together to figure out how could we address this nursing shortage through this grant, and how can we get more of those students that are waiting into our program and graduate more qualified nurses. So we conducted a needs assessment through personal interviews with the healthcare organizations. We looked at industry employment projections, and we created a pretty sound need for the project. But we also brought these people together to the table, our healthcare partners and our workforce investment board, and said, what can we do? Here's what we think we want to do. How is this going to work to meet your needs? And one of the other things that we needed to do, we couldn't find enough qualified nurse instructors. If we wanted to increase the capacity to train more nurses, we have to have qualified nursing instructors. Being that we're in a more rural area, there's a lot of competition from the more suburban and metropolitan areas to get the nursing instructors. So we thought of, let's grow our own. If we can bring in bachelor degree nurses and then allow them to have the time and provide them with the funding to get their master's degrees, then they're more likely to stay with us and be able to train the upper level nurses that we needed. So that worked out pretty well. One of the greatest things that we did through these partnerships was to secure over $600,000 in leveraged resources. And that has been mentioned before, that coming to the table with cash, you need to do that, but it doesn't have to be cash. And we'll talk a little bit more, I think, about the leveraged resources. I imagine that's going to come up in one of the questions. But it can be any number of different types of resources that are in kind. So you don't have to have a lot of cash. I'll go through this quickly because I think I'm probably taking a little more time. But we built on the success of that 2006 Department of Labor grant, and we applied for another grant this year for the Community-Based Job Training Program. This was the last year for that program. We were able in that grant application to point to our 2006 program, the success that we had, and we requested $2.5 million, and we received it. And once again, we were the only educational organization, community college in the state that received the funding. But we had the credibility with the Department of Labor, we partnered with the right people, we had the labor unions, utility companies, and businesses, because our proposal was to help prepare the workforce in our area for the jobs in the emerging green industries. And we leveraged resources of $1.2 million in cash for that, cash and in kind for that project. And this was triple the size of our award in 2006. Just some general tips. Again, we'll have some time to go through these in the panel. Perform a needs assessment. You've got to prepare for success. Make sure you know what your needs are. Create an organizational boilerplate. Have all that information about your organization at your fingertips. You can just cut and paste it into various grant applications. Access and understand the relevant federal guidelines that are going to apply to your grant, because it is a big deal to get federal grant money. You do have to be prepared to administer it properly. Locate the right person to serve as your project director. Who's going to do this work of the grant? Do you have someone on staff who can do it? If you don't, you may not be positioned to succeed with this grant. And then secure the necessary internal support and resources in your organization. Develop a tracking system for the financial and progress reporting. It's going to be significant with federal money. In the era of accountability that we're into now, we're finding that many of our grants require monthly, quarterly, and annual financial and progress reports. So you need to make sure that you don't miss a deadline. And this may not mean something to all of you in the audience, but if you're in the position to develop an indirect cost rate and negotiate that with the federal government, then that can be money that excuse me, comes back to your college that doesn't have to be allocated for direct grant costs. Okay, thank you very much.